Legion, but I was just happy to go
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah.
I email you, Rabbi. Give me the name of a good organization to donate these clothes to.
A lot of thrift stores in this area. There's a JCC thrift store actually, and up off Second Avenue.
Yeah,
That's
great.
great.
No, it's been around for ages.
Yeah, that's,
In
I'm
Plum
sure
Block.
that's a good
And
one.
and across the street from it, there's a good one that does, that supports one of the local hospitals. So if one doesn't take it, the other probably will.
That's fair.
I haven't been shopping there for a while. I get some of my good stuff there.
Yeah, we can find good things. Okay, everybody, how's everybody doing? Good, wonderful. Okay, we have some of our friends online. Hi, everybody. Two friends online, friends in person, so nice, and a friend sitting next to me that I will introduce in just a moment. But I want to just give us a moment to become present and enter into this space. So you don't need anything yet, you can put everything down. Just allow yourself to enter into our Beit Midrash with an open heart, with a willingness to be open to the perspective shared, to the insights that we will offer, to the beauty and richness of our tradition and the words of our Torah as stories that live within us, live through us, and that we add to with our own experiences and our own chokmah, our own wisdom that we share together. And what a joy and privilege it is to be able to study Torah and to be able to allow the words of Torah to enlighten, to allow us to discover, to dig deep, and to find meaning and richness in its wisdom, and to help us find insight and wisdom as we look ahead to this Shabbat in just a few hours. Let's say our blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai. Tanu b'mitzvotav b'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. All right, so today we have a special guest who I am just so thrilled to introduce you to. This is Dr. Chris Lindbeck, who is an associate professor of Jewish studies with a joint appointment to the Department of Languages, Linguistics, and Comparative Literature at FAU, right here in our neighborhood, which is such a joy. She's here for a number of reasons. One, we're developing this wonderful relationship and partnership with her. She'll be teaching in a few months in February, I think. March? Yeah, February. February, she's going to be teaching. She has a book, Elijah and the Rabbis. So leading us and getting us prepared for Passover and to explore that relationship. So she'll be teaching Lunch and Learn on those Tuesdays. And so this was a treat, and she's done incredible work and writing and scholarship on the Akedah, which is this week's Torah portion, Vayera. And so this was just such a joy as we were talking for her to be able to lead us in learning today. And I'm thrilled to have her. She earned her master's in Talmud and Rabbinics from the Jewish Theological Seminary and a doctorate in ancient Judaism covering 500 BCE to 700 BC and 700 CE with a minor topic exam in early Christian literature. And so we are truly blessed to have her. She teaches classical Jewish civilization, Jewish wisdom, Jewish literature through the centuries, women in Judaism, readings in biblical Hebrew, and a historical course on the New Testament at FAU. So she she's got a little bit of knowledge. Yes. I mean, what a treat for us, no? And so great. So without further ado, just so blessed to have you and grateful for you to teach us
Well, it's
today.
so great to see you in person, Rabbi Laila, and not just over Zoom.
Yeah.
So, yes, is it weird I teach New Testament? Not really. I've somehow never found it in myself to convert to Judaism, despite having spent my entire adult life studying Judaism and about 1/3 of my adult life at the Jewish Theological Seminary, given how long I took to get my PhD. And I promised Rabbi Laila a joke about me and my education. When I was doing that minor in early Christian literature and taking a class in New Testament Greek at the liberal Protestant seminary across the street from JTS, I flubbed a photocopy of the New Testament in Greek And I automatically looked around for the Geniza box, which the conservative seminary has,
Yeah.
because it was sacred text, flood photocopy, can't just throw it away. And I go, wait a second.
Right.
There isn't a Geniza box. This is a Protestant seminary.
Wrong seminary.
Yeah, it's wrong seminary. So that's me.
That's so cute.
Not so
It's
much,
within you.
not so much Philo-Semitic as Judeo-tropic. So the story of the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, is famously troubling. And some people think, if they don't, or if they make assumptions without thinking, they think that, but of course the sages of blessed memory would have just seen it as a story of Abraham's total and complete devotion and faith, and not worried about how troubling it is. But they did, just somewhat differently than we do today. But they definitely thought that story brought up questions that needed answers. Now, and at least once in the chapters in Genesis Rabbah that I'm studying, the midrash that was composed about 400 based on the words of the rabbis of previous generations, they even leave the question unanswered. They compare God to an inconsistent teacher who says basically, do what I do, don't do what I say, don't do what I do, and has Israel questioning God. You say, you shall not try the Lord your God, but then God tried Abraham, and they just leave that hanging. God, aren't you being inconsistent here? Although, as I'm sure you all know, Isaac is weaned just before the binding, and he's a grown man, in fact, a middle-aged man whose mother has just passed, just after the binding. How do you read his age? It's a little hard to tell, but the Jewish tradition, begun even before the time of the rabbis, is that he was either a grown man or a teenager, because it would be ethically just completely screwed up, if you'll excuse the language, for God to ask Abraham to sacrifice a son who was too young to consent. Genesis Rabbah has a famous midrash in which Isaac is arguing with Ishmael, and Ishmael is saying, God loves me more because I was 13 years old when I was circumcised, and I could have run away, but I didn't. And you were just a little baby, and you had no choice in the matter. And Isaac says, basically, so help me Hashem, I would give any of my limbs to God. I do have that faith. And it was at that point that God spoke to Abraham and said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, knowing that Isaac, even if he was speaking a little bit in male, or even it feels more like teenage bravado, would consent to this.
Should we read the text?
That was Midrash?
Yes, that was midrash, and I'm not, and it's not the text at all, actually.
Should we read the text first?
No,
Oh,
I'm gonna come to the
Okay,
text. So, then there is the near sacrifice itself, and the troubling way that Abraham is said to fear God. And now let's look at the top text. Now Adonai's messenger called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I swear, Adonai declares, indeed, because you have done this thing, have not withheld your son, your only one, indeed, I will bless you, bless you. V'yomer bi nishbati na'um Hashem, ki ya'an asher aseita et hadavar hazeh v'lo Hashachta et bincha et yechidecha ki bara evarecha. And all the nations of the earth shall enjoy blessing through your seed, because you hearken to my voice. But before that, the angel first says, and go up a little in the scripture if you want, back to Sepharia, since you have it open. It's the fear bit. The scripture says, when Abraham has raised his hand to sacrifice his son, the angel says, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. Or your only one, it's the same, actually, it's a different translation.
Could you please make it a little bigger?
So there are two things here, one of which troubles us, and two of which trouble the sages. The one that troubles both us and the sages is, as I say, this fear thing. If Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son because he feared God, now, obviously, fear, as you all, I'm sure, know, fear of God in the Bible means respect and awe and devotion. But honestly, it also means fear. It's the same word. And so it leaves the door open to Abraham doing this because he was afraid God would smite him. And that's really ethically and religiously troubling. The other thing that troubled the sages, that probably doesn't trouble us, is, though it might if we think about it, is, why does God say, now I know you fear God? Didn't he trust Abraham before? And didn't she, God, in God's all-knowingness, know that Abraham was willing to go through with this, whether not knowing the outcome or perhaps knowing that God would tell him to stop. By the way, modern and ancient interpreters are very interestingly ambivalent about that question. But so the rabbis take care of that by saying, interpreting now I know as now I have made known. They just say, which is not quite as different in Hebrew as it is in English, but still pretty different. But it's just like, no, what it really means is now I have made known. I have told the whole world, I have made known to the whole world how uniquely faithful and obedient and perfect you are, which means that the whole world knows you are the fit ancestor for the whole Jewish people. That is definitely one of the main themes of Genesis Rabbah, when it says that God, one interpretation, in fact, the one that begins the chapters on the binding of Isaac, is they make a pun on tes, which is nasa is the root in Hebrew, and another word that has the root nasa, although spelled different, is raise up. And God, the whole point of the binding of Isaac is to raise up Abraham like the banner on a ship, so everyone will know how uniquely righteous he is. But what about this fear of God thing? The idea that Abraham's obedience and sacrifice was unique and really made a difference, not just in his personal relationship with God, but in the enabling the whole Jewish people to be born. That's a big part of it. But still, what about this fear of God? After reading now I know is now I have made known, the sages do something they rarely do. They paraphrase without saying they are doing so. one of the unique things about rabbinic midrash is they give you the verse and then they interpret the verse. But here, they just paraphrase the verse and they don't even tell you that they're doing it. The angel said, to Abraham, do not do anything to him. That's the beginning of 22:12. And I have made it known to all that you love me. So they just erase the fear and replace it with love. And I find that very interesting. If between the fact that Abraham loves Isaac is the first mention of love between people in the Bible. The second mention is actually that Isaac takes Rebecca into his mother's tent and loves her. But so the rabbis were not content with that. They wanted to stress that Abraham in fact read God. So now you can pull up the rest of the handout.
Can I make one?
Please do.
Yeah, I would love one thing. I want so that we're all on the same page. Let's read from the beginning of the Genesis 22.
Sure.
I just think it's important to get context before we go into the midrash.
Yes.
I think that's really important. And so that we can just review this story so that I think the midrashim will become much more meaningful as we read the straight text first. We have the text on the screen. If you would prefer the book, the Torah books are behind Parsha. So if you prefer to have it in the book form, you can take a book form. If not, it's on Sefaria here. So I'm going to read the Akedah. I want you to listen. Remember, the Akedah we read on Rosh Hashanah morning, as well as this week as part of the regular reading of Torah cycle. Contextually, last week it is Avram, right? God reaches out to Avram. They begin this relationship because Avram walks, as we talked about, chooses to walk and to go forth, Lech Lecha. And now his name has been changed. He's Abraham, the father of many. And now Genesis 22 begins with, Vayhi achar hadvarim ha'ela. Sometime afterwards, God put Abraham to the test, saying, Abraham. And he answered, how does he answer? Hineni, here I am. Remember, we're going to see that verse, that word over and over again, especially in this Parsha. It happens 3 times, 3 different times contextually.
May I make a really silly request? Could
Yes.
you put the text, the Hebrew and English parallel? I just find it easier to read like that.
I will.
No, just go to A and then it's an option.
Yes, here.
Bingo.
Okay, let me do it the other way though. Yeah, okay, all right. Abraham, Hineni. Okay, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love. Remember, the words are important, that it's intentional. Whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. Okay, Vayashkem Abraham. So early the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. One of my favorite lines of the Torah, by Yom HaShlishi, Vayisa Abraham et einav. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw. It took Abraham 3 days to look up. All right, important to just keep in mind. If we're thinking about, especially when we get to the rabbinic literature, they're focusing and trying to understand who this character of Abraham is and what is Abraham doing. Abraham's 3rd day, he looks up and he saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the donkey, and the boy and I will go up, we will worship, and we will return to you. Okay, right. Things for us to hear and to think about. I don't want to take too much time because I want our, Dr. Lindbeck to speak. Chris, okay, all right, so we will come back, okay, important language. I'll go up with the boy and we will come back together. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, put it on Isaac his son, and he himself took the firestone and the knife, and the 2 walked off together. Then Isaac said to his father, first time we hear Isaac's voice, Abraham, and he says, Avi, my father. And he said, what does he say? Yes, my son, Hineni, here I am. And Isaac says, here's the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, it is God who will see to the sheep for this burnt offering, my son. And the two of them walked on together. They arrived at the place of which God had told him. Abraham built an altar there, and he laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. Then a messenger of Adonai called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Vayomer, Hineni. Here I am.
You've got someone to admit.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. When Abraham looked up, remember he looked up again, his eye fell upon a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went, took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yireh, whence the present saying, on the mount of Adonai there is vision. And the messenger of Adonai called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I swear, Adonai declares, because you have done this and not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba.
Okay, thank you. This is about where we're picking up. Now, Genesis Rabbah is, if you read the actual text itself or a literal translation, it takes a good deal of filling in because it wasn't written to be read like a book. It was written as notes for teachers and preachers. So I'm gonna talk this out, which is pretty much a literal translation of a good medieval manuscript with a few additions of my own, but I'm going to add a lot more because you need a lot more to reconstitute it so much. What you have is kind of freeze-dried Torah in the text. And I'm going to also mention something like something about a certain form of the midrash, which you already know, even if you don't know the name for it. It's called the peticha or peticha, which is to say, it's often translated parable, but it's not like it's not like one of Aesop's fables or a Christian parable in the New Testament. It's always a way of interpreting the Torah, not interpreting a particular text. And it also, sometimes it also means that, and what I'm going to read you is two of these parables, if you like, that are meant to interpret something very puzzling. The angel of the Lord called unto Abraham a second time and said, by myself I swear. God hardly ever does that. And why in the world would God need to do that? I mean, isn't God's word good enough? Be nishpati? What? What is going on? And so what is the need for the oath? What compels God to swear on God's self? The first midrashic explanation, which comes with a brief of something like almost like a semi-parable or an analogy, that it's Abraham said to him, swear to me not to test me, nor my son Isaac. Like one who leaps across marshy ground and makes his son leap with him. One of the troubling things about the text in the Torah itself is that Isaac kind of disappears after his binding.
I mean, what a cheer.
What?
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Right.
And Abraham's view, it doesn't, Abraham's idea of Isaac, and that's something that the rabbis very much want to supply. Abraham, having risked his son, is angry enough at God enough and loves God enough to say, swear to me not to do this again to either of us. I think that's a pretty good midrash. And then the second midrash is just delightfully weird. And I need to give you a little bit of background. One of the things, starting from even in the Second Temple times, some sage came up with the idea that God gave Abraham 10 trials. That maybe there's even kind of a weird borrowing from Hellenistic stories of the 7 trials of Hercules or something, or maybe it just simply seemed a way to make Abraham a hero and to make the story of Abraham exciting. The first trial is obviously being told, Lech lecha, just get up and go. But except maybe the first trial is something that doesn't actually appear in scripture, which is him being willing to face the fiery furnace. There are different numberings to different rabbis, and before the rabbinic period, and also the rabbinic period. But by the rabbinic period, one thing was solid, that the last trial and most terrible trial and most important trial was this, being told to sacrifice his beloved son. So here is another interpretation. What was the need of this oath? Rabbi Levi said in the name of Rabbi Chama ben Rabbi Chanina, he said to him, Abraham said to God, swear to me not to test me ever again. I think one of the things we see here is something very Jewish, which is that with intimacy and love, it can also come anger and calling the people you love to account. And Abraham, after his act of deep devotion and almost shocking obedience in being willing to sacrifice his son, now calls God to account. And in the intimacy of their relationship. And it's like a king who was married to a noble lady. She gave birth to her first son by him, and he divorced her. A second, and he divorced her. Obviously, he remarried her. And, he remarried her. She had a third son, and he divorced her again. When she had given birth to a 10th son by him, they all gathered and said to the king, swear to us not to divorce our mother again. Enough of this. Similarly, when Abraham had been tested for the 10th time, he said to him, swear to me not to test me again.
I think what's interesting here about this, when we think about that it's a display of the intimacy between the relationship between Abraham and God, is that we've seen in the text up until now, after the flood, that God puts the rainbow in the sky as a symbol of the covenant that I will not do this again. And yet, I'm going to put this rainbow in the sky throughout time as a consistent reminder of this relationship, of this covenant, but also as a consistent relationship to remind myself that I will not let my anger, my frustration, propel me to do such a thing again, because I've made this promise not to send the floodwaters. But yet it's just sort of this like covenant in the sky, whereas this is much more direct. This is, I swear to you, and you swear to me. And this is sort of Abraham is that figure of that initial intimate relationship that a human has with the divine.
Yes.
So I think that's very interesting. Marcia,
If Abraham had such an intimate relationship with God, why didn't he say it before?
It's an excellent question.
first of all, I think it's an excellent question, because also I think what it's demonstrating, and I wonder, especially when you bring this midrash here where Abraham says, swear to not test me again. Could one argue, just through the rabbinic lens, through the rabbinic literature lens, I wonder you could make the argument that Abraham is going along with this plan just as much as God is going along with this plan, for the two of them to then say to each other, do not test me, do not test me. We know we're in this together. Like, that's an interesting lens or frame to take, that for Abraham, it wasn't enough to just say it at the outset, but it's to say, look how far I'm gonna go. Look, and then God say, look how far I'm gonna go, right? Like, that's an interesting dialectic there, that maybe if it had just been like, no, like, that's too far, or, right, like, they had to go through those initial motions to get to the end result, but it's a fascinating question. Spencer, then Marilyn.
Have we considered that it's not so much a, don't test me again, and more of God saying, okay, you've passed my trials, here is your reward by me swearing you this special oath, given you had this special trial. That it doesn't come from Abraham, but instead it comes from God.
I think that's the shot of scripture.
Yeah.
What you just said, totally, and it makes a lot of sense. But the rabbis, for some reason, wanted to do something a little more, a little different, and propose as a possibility, but as you all know, 70 meanings to every, legit meanings to every verb. The rabbis wanted to propose that maybe not just the blessing, which Abrahamites definitely do as a reward, but that's very specific phrase. The rabbis always are very careful readers of specific phrases. By my own, by my own self, I swear, the Lord declares, is because Abraham asked him to swear, even demanded he swear.
It's an even interesting thing that I hadn't thought about before until you said it now too. It's very similar to Jacob, when Jacob says to the angel, do not leave before you bless me.
So
And-
there might have been even thinking of that.
I wonder, like,
Yeah.
like that's an interesting, I hadn't thought about that correlation until now.
Sages might have been thinking about that even.
Yeah, it could be, because I think, so as we're talking about Yaakov, when Jacob goes to lay down in anticipation of meeting his brother Esau again, after lots of complex interaction and relationship, and after a long period of time before meeting one another, he lays down and he has this interaction with a malach, with some sort of an Adam, some sort of a figure, and wrestles. And as the dawn is breaking, this figure says, I have to go, dawn is breaking. And yet Jacob says, well, before you leave, you must bless me. Right.
He hangs on to
He hangs
him.
on to him, like, do not go until you bless me. And that's when the name change occurs from Yaakov to Yisrael. So like, that's an interesting, Marilyn, and then Maddie, and then Jack has a
I
hand.
don't have to bury too much, but I'm wondering, because about what you're saying about this relationship between God and Isaac had that also, because it didn't seem like he fought with his father. I mean, someone comes over to me, fires me up, wants to stab me,
No.
I fight back.
It's
So is there any indication that he too had a relationship with God and he knew that he'd be okay, that he went along with it?
no, actually, the interesting thing that the rabbis bring Isaac in essentially 3 times. One is this initial argument, they completely make up this argument between Isaac and Ishmael. The second is their interpretation of 2 things that happen on Mount Moriah. They say that, firmly believing that Isaac is at least a teenager, they are troubled by his very innocent sounding question. Father, here is the, so here's the wood and the knife, so where's the lamb of the sacrifice? And they come up with a amazing story about how this demonic figure, Samael, this kind of a Satan figure, tempts both of them. And Abraham stays completely firm. But really digs in the knife for Isaac. He says, think about your poor mother and all of the clothing she made for you, and think about the hundreds of hours that goes into spinning and weaving and sewing in those days. That was going to go to your brother, half brother Ishmael, you hate. And at that point, Isaac knows this is God's will. He still is willing to do it, but he's like, oh, well, maybe I'm just going to sound really pathetic, and maybe my father will pity me. And so that's why he asks that question like a much younger boy. And then the other thing they look at, because they really do want to make it clear that Isaac was a willing sacrifice.
Right, a willing participant.
A willing participant is what says that Abraham bound Isaac. They say, can a man who's 100 years old, bind a teenager, a young or middle-aged man? Of course not. Isaac said to him, now having taken a deep breath and being completely on board again, if this sacrifice is going to be legit, it has to be proper shechita. I can't twitch. So please tie me up.
Right, there's even the midrash like tie me tight.
Tie me, yes.
Tighter.
And because so there, Isaac does play a role, but it does not say that Isaac argued with his father or with God, although he did waver a little at one point.
Maddie?
It just sounds to me, and go back to the before part, that, this question came up, do not do this to me again, that Abraham was maybe for the first time, felt he had some leverage with God. And that they got close enough, or he was tested enough, so that he could not be a silent, participant. He had a little power in that relationship. And I'm wondering if that was a precursor of, later times when people, would look to bargain with God.
Well, Abraham already bargained with God for
Sodom and Gomorrah.
in Sodom and Gomorrah. And one of the troubling things about this story is, why does Abraham object,
Right.
given we've already seen him able to bargain with God? But I don't think that's that hard, given that it's always easier to ask for a certain person of good character. It's easier to ask for mercy for other people is to ask for mercy for yourself. But now, as the rabbis envision the relationship between Abraham and God, indeed, he feels like he's willing and able to ask for what he needs.
I just want to get Jack.
Yes, sorry.
Jack?
Yeah, there are 2 points that I bring out on Genesis 22:2. God says to him, go to that he wants to present him as an offering to God. It doesn't say to sacrifice him. It says to offer him. And as we found out with Cain and Abel, God doesn't have to accept the offer. The other point I want to bring out is that I really see this as a test of Abraham. I mean, here you have Abraham, who can be argumentative and can question. When his son says, Father, he says, I am here for you. I'm your father, I'm here. And when God says this, he says, I am here for God too. This point is brought up because it says something about Abraham's personality. He realizes he's not in a position to act definitively at this time. The conundrum is, how do I satisfy both my son and God at the same time? And I think that word to offer up gave Abraham a little space in saying, maybe God doesn't want to do this.
I thank you. Do you know that you agree with the sages here? There's another scene before this in the midrash of Abraham complaining to God. First you tell me all your descendants will be through your son Isaac, and then you tell me to offer him up. And indeed, that is a normal word for a sacrifice, but he also does mean raise up. And that's what God says. Hey, I didn't tell you to kill him. I told you to raise him up, and now I'm asking you to take him down. And I've always been frustrated by that. It sounds kind of superficial response to God from God, given the trauma he has just caused the father and son. But I like what you're saying, and I think it goes well with it, and it helps me understand the midrash that word to offer up. Although in context, in the pshat, it kind of means to offer as a sacrifice and kill and everything. It doesn't necessarily mean that. And yes, that's a little room. When you stressed when you read the Parsha of the chapter itself, Rabbi Laila, that that he said, we will go up and worship and we will return. The rabbi said he was prophesying without knowing he was prophesying.
Right.
He was not lying, he was unconsciously prophesying or maybe speaking from hope when he said that, which again would harmonize nicely with what you said. Spencer.
I think Hilda was first.
Oh,
Do you-
hold on.
Oh, well, I'm thinking about the character of Abraham. And he didn't seem to have any, well, I shouldn't say any second thoughts. He sent his first son away into all kinds of danger, who knows?
Though he did have second thoughts. He asked God, should I really do this?
But he sent him away
Yeah.
anyway,
True.
into an unknown whatever. And so here's his younger son. I mean, he seems a little slimy to me. I mean, really.
Oh, no, I think the rabbis perhaps were sensitive to that perspective, and that's one reason why they have him going to bat for his son here. And
the first one?
well, he did, he asked God, he said, wait, should I really do this? And God said, yeah, do what Sarah wants. Sorry.
What I think is fascinating, both in, Israel and that part of the world, but also all the way over to the Aztecs more recently, people have been willing to do human sacrifice, both the participants and the people sacrificing them. And at that time in Judaism, there was no problem.
No, there was no human sacrifice.
No human
Sacrifice was only animals.
God hadn't said yet though at that time, has he?
No, there's never, it's not ever been, human sacrifice.
No, I know in Judaism, but at this time, God hadn't said we're not doing that. Before the binding of Isaac, right? He didn't say we're not sacrificing humans.
That's not necessarily the olah itself, like that we're talking about here. That's why the rabbis are trying with the midrash to fill in the lines. So a midrash is the rabbinic story, the rabbinic filling in between the lines that are not written there. Because for them, they're reading and they're saying, wait a second, we don't offer sacrifices in Judaism, it is not human sacrifice. That's not what we do. So we need to understand what is God actually asking. So that's what the rabbis are saying. They're trying to understand it.
Yes, but also, Spencer, you are actually speaking similarly to a lot of great 19th and 20th century scholars of scripture, Christian and Jewish, who say that the original meaning of this story, before it was ever part of the Torah, is God is making it clear to the Israelite people who will become the Jewish people that there isn't human sacrifice, and he's doing that by, say, appearing to command it and then saying no.
Right.
So it's a teaching story like that.
Right.
Other biblical scholars say, well, maybe it was that once upon a time, but the emphasis, as it in the story in the Torah as it is written, is we assume there's no human sacrifice, and we make it very clear that from the very first verse of the chapter, Nisa, that this is a one-time radical test. And not something that will ever happen before or after.
It's not unprecedented for someone to go willingly. Not, we've never done it, but other cultures around us have.
No, I mean, it was definitely prevalent in the Valley of Gehenna where we talk about,
Yeah.
there is definitely conversation and discussion that that's was happening, but it wasn't as part of.
No, it was never part of us, it was just, at that time, no one got it and said no at that point.
Right, and as to your point, it's
Yeah.
about being very clear that it's not.
Yes, when I was in high school, I wrote a poem about my good for nothing ancestors who not much more than a mere millennium ago were convincing slave girls that they really wanted to be strangled and buried with the corpses of their Viking chieftains. Pretty disgusting. Yes, it's a fairly common thing around the world. So, yeah, you don't have to go further because the house test. It's just a pre-Christian Viking. So I need to head out a little early, so I'm just gonna go the last 3 lines, give you the last 3 lines here. So we're still thinking in the context of the, Abraham's numerous trials, but we're also looking at what does it mean that God says, I'm blessing you because you have done this thing. I mean, hasn't Abraham lived an entire adult, well, not quite adult life, he was an adult before, but an entire, decades and decades of obedience to God's command. So what does that mean? This was the last trial which outweighed all the rest. And had he not taken upon himself this last trial, he would have lost all that he did. And he wouldn't have just lost it for himself, but the Jewish people, in a sense, would have been stillborn. Because this everything depended on this. There's a mashal, a parable in the Talmud on this same verb, when it says take your son, when God says take your son, he says kach na, please take your son. And why does God need to say please to anybody, for heaven's sake?
Right.
And this parable it says it's like a king who was facing a brutal enemy, and he had one warrior who was his champion, who could not be defeated. And he knew that only this warrior could defeat that enemy. So he said, please fight this war for me. And Abraham, God is the king and Abraham is the warrior. So but it's such a pleasure to be here. I can stick around for another couple minutes and then I need to scoot.
Thank you, yes, thank you so much. So I wanna sort of bring us, amazing, the studying of the Midrashim, especially on this Parsha, which is so intense, it's so complex, it's emotional, it's thought-provoking, it pulls from within us many different emotions, and for the rabbis too, that's the point. The idea is that they didn't just see this as an episode in the Abraham and God journey, but rather one that required more to really dig deep and to understand what is happening here amongst all the different characters in the story. God is a character, Abraham is a character, Isaac is a character, the angel is a character, and then there's the character of us who are the readers, and the rabbis as readers too. And I think one of the profound pieces of this, that we read it more than once in the year, right, on one of our holy days, Rosh Hashanah, and also on Shabbat, is the idea of what it means to be called upon by God. What does it mean to be tested, right? There's so many questions that we ask ourselves here. The relationship between a father and son is so powerful here in this story, and it requires so much in-depth exploration because it's troubling. There's also tenderness, it's fragile. We also, once after this moment, the relationship and the character of Isaac is one that is also troubling in the text. We don't know so much about him. We don't hear him speak so much. Remember, he's also the interaction between his two sons also leaves him in a delicate and fragile place. His eyes become dim, is what they say, right? He can't see the difference between Isaac. Isaac, yeah, right, so there's all these pieces of these characters that the text will bring us back to this moment. That this was such a traumatic, difficult moment in the lives of both father and son. Remember, and then next week is Chaye Sarah that opens with the death of Sarah, right after this episode. Right, so for this family, this traumatic event or this episode in and of itself has these ripple effects in the text that lead them on different journeys that cause us to pause to say, what are we supposed to take from this experience? What are all the different learning moments and the meaning behind the text that is supposed to help us find meaning in our own lives? What is it calling to us? What questions is it forcing us to confront, not only of the text, but of our own lives? And so I think the Akedah in and of itself, it allows us to travel many different paths and journeys to understanding who we are, who we can become, what happens to us in different moments and trials and tribulations in our own lives, what is the transformation and the evolution that we undergo, and how does that impact us, how contextually, and what is this whole story trying to teach us? So if we take a moment and just sit for a moment, what does this story, it's not the first time we've heard it, we hear it multiple times in our year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
for
much.
being with
I
us.
really enjoyed this very much.
When you think about, it was a pleasure, we're so grateful that you came, thank you.
Enjoyed it. You're welcome. Good to meet you all.
When you take a moment and pause and think on the Akedah, what are your initial reactions to the text? And then as you study it and you see all the different permutations of what the text can mean, where does it then take you? So take a moment and just to think on that. You have the Pshat reading that makes you feel one way. And then you have the deeper analysis that we've done here. And where does that leave you? Like, what questions and what thoughts go around in your head?
So God is so patient with the Israelites when they're wandering in the desert, and he gives them so many chances, and they feel like, was it really so important for Abraham to follow God here? Or would it have, you know, it can't decide
Yeah.
whether Abraham did the right thing or the wrong thing. Yes, he wanted to show he was obedient to God, but he's argued with God before, and he'll argue with God again. Why was this so important that he didn't argue? And God was so patient with the Jewish people so many times, and we didn't believe him, and we built the calf, and he still forgave us, and we did this, and he still forgave us, and we wanted food, and he still forgave us. Would he have forgiven Abraham for this, or was he too young in God's own growth?
Fascinating.
And I just can't really wrap my head around it.
Good, right? Like I think, what a beautiful answer, right? Like, I think the wrestling of it, I think also contextually, right? Like the relationship between God and the Jewish people is as a result of this relationship that God is first growing and evolving into with Abraham, right? Like that comes hundreds of years later, the journey out of Egypt, right? And the evolution of that relationship. And this is pardon the term, this is the genesis of that relationship, right? Like in the book of Genesis. That this really is this beginning of what it means to be in relationship. And Abraham argues with God over Sodom and Gomorrah. And says, well, if you find one, right, like, would you still get rid of it, right? Like they debate this, they have this struggle. What I find really interesting about this story and is that the blessing that God, or the quote unquote reward that God gives to Abraham after this episode is the same blessing that God had already bestowed upon him when he was Avram. And so that's an interesting bookend to this episode in the life of Avram to Abraham. That the blessing that God says is that if you left Lecha, if you go forth, I will bless you, everyone will be blessed, you'll be as numerous as the stars in the sky, right? Like you'll be this great people. And that's the same blessing that he receives at the end of this episode. The parameters of the covenant haven't changed. In fact, now they've just been reiterated. It's a bookend to it. And so I think that's really interesting, right? Like it's not, he didn't gain anything new. And so I'm wondering if at this point in time, as they've started to walk together and they're developing this walk of partnership of covenant together, that this moment, this episode, that if you take the perspective of the rabbinic lens to say, you know, the truth is everyone was in on this. Everyone knew. Abraham knew, Isaac knew. The only ones who didn't know were the Na'arav, the servants who waited for him. And maybe they knew, maybe they didn't know, right? But that the main characters in this plot, in this episode, knew what was going to happen. And yet we all walked it together because we're on this walk to show one another that we're really in it. Right? Right? Like that's one argument that the rabbis are going to make. Everybody knew. Abraham knew he wasn't going to offer his son. You could say aliyah means to go up. You go up in ascent and holiness. And so to ascend into the holy sacred space of this relationship, we had to go through this experiment and we had to make aliyah. We had to ascend to that mountain in order to all of us meet Abraham, God, Isaac, had to be in this holy bond with one another. And so we're all in on it together, right?
And has the covenant come true? We're not that numerous. We're just a little pittance of the people.
Yeah, I
We
mean,
survived a long time, but we're
Right.
not.
right, so I mean, I guess you
Not
could,
like the
right,
cities.
right, we're not like the majority, and I guess you could make that argument that like great civilizations have come and gone. Right, like the great Roman civilization and the empires have come and gone, and yet we have, right, we're small, but we have we continue to have presence and be part, right, like we didn't dissipate, we didn't disappear, and there were moments where it could have happened, right, along the historical timeline of our narrative. Could have happened multiple times, but yet it didn't, right, so is that the blessing? Is that the covenant? Right? Let's see, Tara says, for me, it's twofold. Why was Abraham so willing to sacrifice Isaac like the pagans of Baal, and yet he is viewed as the epitome of a good parent? Is he? I don't know. What do you think, Tara?
Oh yeah, I'm at my mom's anyway in Richmond. Anyway, I was reading a commentary, actually I watched a commentary of Rabbi Sachs and his YouTube, it was like 13 minutes long about this particular Parsha. And he said child sacrifice was standard in the pagan communities. And why was these are my notes, why was Abraham so willing to be like the pagans of Baal? And he said at this time, kids were viewed as property of the parents. And then Rabbi Sachs goes to say, God, not parents, owns our children. So I guess my confusion is, was he so willing to do this? Did he know in the back of his mind he was being tested? And then at the same time, he is the ultimate patriarch. I don't know. To me, it's a little bit of that human fallibility combined with the exaltness of his figure. It's just, there's a little bit of, I guess that human fallibility comes into play. And we have to see it as like, even the most powerful figures like Abraham can go through things and be like, oh yeah, that's questionable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a thread and a trope that we talk about with many of the biblical figures, right? They are far from perfect, far, okay? And even Danielle Hartman, as we learned in Lunch and Learn this past week, talks about just the craziness of the Genesis story with the characters involved. That they are not moral and ethical figure, like they are not the testament of moral and ethical behavior that we should try to live up to, but yet they force us, if they were so righteous, so perfect all the time, is that someone that we could look at and say, I see myself in you, right? Where would the story go? If everyone is so great and perfect and wonderful, would we have a whole scroll of material to talk about? Right? like that we have to, that there is, that these stories are there for a reason to force us to say, there are moments in my life where I am not living up to the best self. There are moments in my life where I go astray, where I stumble, where I fall, and yet I tshuva, I turn, I return, I am back, I'm gonna follow my Yetzer Tov, I'm gonna abandon my Yetzerah, right? There are moments on the parenting journey that we just don't hit it right every time. Right? And there are moments where us as children look at our parents and like, what are they doing? Right? Like my husband and we joke all the time, like, right? I'm like, oh my God. Like, oh yeah, I hope I'm doing this right. Like there's no handbook for this, right? And then you say like, where's the Rahmanis? Did I have the full Rahmanis for my own parents, right? Like, Maddie.
When I went to Murakami Park, which is park full of gardens and everything. It's built on the tradition of the Japanese culture. And every road and every path and every location, the twists and turns, there's a reason that it's reflected on that. And there's one place where a bridge does not go from A to B directly. You can imagine a bridge. It maneuvers this way, this way, this way, this way. And it kind of mirrors what life is. And they call that the zigzag bridge.
Oh, beautiful.
And I thought, it really helps keep in mind that we do make, different detours. And in the case of, God, who is our Father and everything, I think these detours are, opportunities to learn, whether we make a mistake or really an homage to our humanity.
Beautiful. And with that, what I want everyone to think about on this Shabbat is all of the different trials, tribulations, quote unquote tests that you've experienced, that you felt, that you have struggled with, that you have traveled, the zigzags of your own humanity that you have traveled, and that will continue over the course of our lives. And yet, what are the pieces what are these elements that hold you firm, that you walk with, that you carry, that help you to travel those zigzags, those journeys that ultimately, Aliyah, allow us to ascend above it, beyond it, and to continue on moving forward. Shabbat Shalom, my brother.
Announcement?
Yes, an announcement.
Everybody, I just want to say today is the first day of our Art and Soul Gathering.
Oh.
And the Art and Soul Gathering is really about the gathering part, the connecting part. It is a circle. And during that period of time, we will be creating together. And it's really not about having good art skills. It's really about the joy of coming together, creating, and community. And I'm leading it, and I invite you all to come. It's gonna be on Fridays, right after this. Bring something to eat. And we're going to have a beautiful connection. It has nothing to do with whether you're an artist or not, because I am not a trained artist. I'm not schooled formally, but I learned techniques and I can share. And today I'm showing some of the things I put together. And you're all welcome, and I'd love to have you. And I